Conan, a prosperous self-made entrepreneur, held a prominent position in the city's recognition. His renown was not solely derived from his diverse business ventures, but also owed to his benevolent philanthropy. He displayed exceptional kindness and generosity, regularly donating significant portions of his earnings to support orphanages and hospitals. Despite Conan's virtuous nature, his wife contrasted sharply in character. Margaret didn't like that her husband would spend his hard-earned money on strangers, saying he was spending it on nothing. She was superficial, always wanting the latest designer items and traveling to luxurious places around the world. One day, Margaret discovered from a friend of hers that she had been seeing Conan come out of an old metal hut every day. The hut was near a trailer park, and it seemed as if he was visiting someone there. This didn't sit well with Margaret, and many thoughts suddenly popped into her head. Is he having an affair? Does he have an illegitimate child? When Conan got home, Margaret asked him where he came from that night. I was at work, of course. Then I dropped by my friend's office for a quick chat, he said. Margaret instantly knew he was lying and grew even more suspicious. She decided to follow Conan in the next days to see whether or not what her friend said was right. After a couple of days, Margaret was surprised to see a stroller parked in front of the metal hut that her husband visited every day. Her heart was pounding, nervous that her initial thoughts of Conan having an illegitimate child were right. She could hear a child cry inside the hut to make matters worse. Unable to stop herself, Margaret stormed inside. She saw Conan sitting next to a woman cradling a baby in her arms. Conan, what's going on here? Who is this, and why have you been visiting them every day? Are you having an affair? She said, so much emotion pouring out of her at once. Margaret, I can explain. Please, let's talk about this at home, Conan replied, trying to calm her down. The woman carrying the baby looked apologetic and tried to avoid Margaret's furious gaze. Conan and Margaret left the hut and went home right after. As they sat across each other at the dining table, Margaret had her arms across her chest. Go on, she told her husband. Explain yourself. You know I would never cheat on you, Margaret. It hurts me that you even thought that. However, I have to admit that I have been hiding things from you. I know you disapprove of my charity work, but it's something I want to continue doing, he started to explain. 2 weeks ago, I saw this woman named Lucy carrying her baby. She was standing on the street, begging for money. I approached her and gave her $100 so she could get her daughter a warm blanket and some diapers. I asked her why they were on the street, Conan said. Margaret still wouldn't soften her gaze at this point and still glared at her husband. He continued anyway, saying Lucy had been living in the hut for 3 months. Her husband left them 3 months ago, claiming he'd worked in another city and return after 2 months. He never came back. I offered to get them a serviced apartment so her child would be more comfortable, but she refused. She said she loved her boyfriend and wanted to wait for him in the place where he said he'd return, Conan revealed. He added that he wouldn't be able to forgive himself if anything happened to the woman and child, especially after knowing what they've gone through. So he visited them every day, bringing them hot meals and other necessities. I don't believe you. This woman is your mistress, isn't she? Margaret accused. Margaret, of course not. How can you even say that? Wouldn't you help them too if you were in my position? He asked. No, and I don't want you to continue helping that woman. If you don't stop, I will file for divorce, she threatened. Conan shook his head. I am not going to do that, Margaret. Don't threaten me with divorce just because you don't like me helping other people. We have more than enough money to last us a lifetime. What's a couple of thousands to spare for others? Realizing that Conan wouldn't budge, Margaret rolled her eyes and stormed out of their dining room. The following day, she decided to do the unthinkable. She went to court, trying to get Lucy's parental rights revoked. The bitter wife claimed that Lucy had no means to support her child and had been deceiving married men to give her money. Conan heard about what Margaret did through his chauffeur. He was furious and drove to the courthouse right away. What do you think you're doing? He said, storming inside the lawyer's office where Margaret was seated. Doing what this woman deserves, Margaret said coldly. He accused her. Do you have no compassion for others? I can't believe I married such a monster. He pulled her outside the office, explaining, Margaret, don't you understand why I support her? My father abandoned us when I was 4, and we struggled on the streets and relied on food banks. Knowing her husband's past, Margaret remained unfazed, focused on his rags-to-riches story that provided her a luxurious life. I want to help others with the money I worked hard for, He asserted, "You can't deprive me of that. I can't believe I wasted so much time with such a monster. I'm done with this relationship. I'm filing for divorce." With one last look, he walked away. Margaret tried desperately to win Conan back, but was met with refusal. He served her divorce papers and insisted she vacate their home immediately. Left to fend for herself, Margaret had to sell her designer belongings to afford a room to rent. Meanwhile, Conan thrived in his business endeavors and charitable works. He also supported Lucy, who had been heartbroken when her previous relationship fell apart, leaving her and their child behind. Conan rented an apartment for Lucy, and as they spent more time together, their connection deepened. Eventually, they got married and shared a loving, caring upbringing for their child together.